It began the way many stories of suburban fear do, not with a scream, but with silence. In a town where the ordinary was routine, and the unexpected was almost unwelcome. It started with a simple absence, a mother, a jog, a vanishing. Shelby Tebo was not someone who drew much attention. Her days were scheduled, predictable, comfortingly mundane. The type of woman whose face might disappear into a crowd, whose name might be easily forgotten, until the day she was gone. It was a foggy morning, the kind that clings to tree trunks and hangs low over rooflines. Shelby left her house wearing running shoes and a hoodie. She kissed her baby goodbye. She never came home. At first, there was little more than a flicker of concern. She'd been out longer than usual. Maybe her phone died. Maybe she took a longer route. Maybe she just needed a break. After all, being a mother was exhausting. But when the sun set and she still hadn't returned, the whispers began. Her husband reported her missing that evening. Police arrived. Flashlights searched tree lines. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, clutching mugs they weren't drinking from. Soon, local volunteers combed the trails where Shelby jogged every morning. What they found were her sneakers, both of them neatly side by side on the edge of the path, untouched by mud. No blood, no signs of struggle, just an eerie stillness. And from that moment, the quiet suburb began to unravel. It started with suspicion, first directed outward toward strangers, passersby, the delivery man, the teen loitering at the corner store. But soon, suspicion turned inward, toward each other. Friends became cautious, neighbors became voyeurs, every household became its own locked fortress, and Shelby's name became something spoken in hushed tones. But time moved on, as it always does, and with it came a brittle kind of forgetting. Days turned to weeks. Shelby Tebo's photo faded in store windows. Her name slipped further down the news ticker. Eventually, the town began to breathe again, just a little, until it happened again. This time, the disappearance was different. Meredith Dickey wasn't just another young mother. She was known in the community, a midwife, trusted, respected. She vanished early one morning, her car still in the driveway, front door unlocked. But it wasn't just Meredith. Her 6-year-old daughter, Delilah, was missing. The shock hit harder the second time. It was no longer a fluke or an isolated case. To women, one child, gone without explanation. And this time, there was blood, drops of it on the bathroom floor, smudges on the wall. A sense of urgency now pulsed beneath the fear. Search teams were larger, the media louder, the community paralyzed. Every mother in town held her children a little tighter. Every father double-checked the locks before bed. Doors that once stayed open were now bolted. Lights that once dimmed early now burned all night long. Speculation ran wild. Was it the same person who took Shelby? Had someone been watching the women? Was the neighborhood being hunted? But then, silence again. No ransom, no body, no sign of the missing girl, no clues. Meredith and Delilah had vanished as though the earth had swallowed them whole. The town, once vibrant and predictable, began to rot from the inside. Schools held safety drills. Jogging paths became empty. Once friendly waves across driveways faded into curt nods and closed blinds. A fear settled, and that was more enduring than panic. It was the fear of the unknown. Time, as it always does, marched forward. Shelby Tebo's name became legend. Meredith Dickey became the other one. And Delilah, the girl who vanished, became little more than a ghost. In the collective memory of the town, her name, repeated in playground gossip and whispered during PTA meetings, became a warning and a wound. And so the town waited, for closure, for answers, for bodies, or for justice. None came, until 11 years later, someone returned. In the time since Meredith Dickey and her daughter vanished, the world had changed, the town had changed. New families moved in, unaware of the shadows that clung to certain houses, certain names. Fences were replaced, gardens replanted, but the ground beneath it all held stories no one spoke aloud. So when a girl appeared one rainy afternoon, stumbling into the lobby of a roadside convenience store, barefoot and bruised, everything stopped. She said her name was Delilah. And just like that, The town's carefully reconstructed sense of peace shattered. The news spread like wildfire. Local stations rushed to the store. Cameras caught images of a pale, rail-thin girl wrapped in a silver rescue blanket. Eyes wide and empty, there was disbelief, then awe, then something colder, suspicion. Had she really returned? Was it really Delilah Dickey? The girl barely spoke. Her answers came in fragments. She didn't remember much or didn't want to. Her body told a story of years lost, scars in places no child should carry them. Calluses formed in darkness, wrists that flinched even at kindness. DNA confirmed it. It was her. Delilah. The girl who had vanished at 6 was back. People wanted to celebrate. A miracle, they called it. A blessing. But behind the smiling headlines and the police briefings, a different question festered beneath the surface. Where had she been? And why had she survived when the others hadn't? Police reopened the case. Investigators returned to homes they hadn't visited in a decade. Familiar faces grew anxious. Secrets, long buried, began to tremble under the weight of scrutiny. There were files to dust off, interviews to redo, names to re-examine. This time, they were determined to find out what had really happened, not just to Delilah, but to Meredith, and maybe even Shelby. The girl was taken to a recovery center. Her re-entry into the world was careful, controlled, like a creature re-emerging from the wild. She didn't talk about where she'd been, not at first. When she did speak, it was cryptic. A room, a basement, a man with a beard. Nothing the police could track, nothing they could hold onto. But she remembered some things. She remembered screaming. She remembered the sound of a door locking from the outside. And she remembered that she hadn't been alone. There had been another child, a boy. That revelation sent the investigation in a new direction. Who was the boy? Had he also been taken? Had he died? No records matched. No missing person reports lined up. It was a dead end, one of many. And yet, her story stirred things awake. Residents who had settled into forgetting now found themselves remembering. They walked the trails again, not to jog, but to look. Some brought flowers to the spot where Shelby's shoes were found. Others stood outside the Dickey house, watching its windows for signs of life. But the house was no longer a home. It stood empty, abandoned for years, still registered to Meredith Dickey's husband, Josh. He had stayed in town after the disappearance, a ghost of a man, barely seen, never heard from. A shell walking through life with no wife, no daughter, no answers. Now that Delilah was back, he refused media requests, refused visitors. He refused even the police. Some said he was grieving. Others weren't so sure. Questions multiplied. Why had only Delilah returned? Had Meredith tried to escape? Was she dead? Was she still out there? The investigation hit wall after wall. What little Delilah could offer was patchy at best. She'd been taken somewhere dark, kept inside. She rarely saw daylight. The man who kept her came and went. She had no sense of time, no sense of where she was. Only the faint memory of a door she was never allowed to open. But that door had opened, somehow. She had escaped, and that terrified people more than anything else, because if she escaped, it meant he was still out there, somewhere in the quiet suburb, among the families, the barbecues, the garage doors opening on lazy Sunday afternoons. Someone knew the truth. Someone had taken a child, held her for over a decade, and let her go. And that someone might still be watching. Delilah's return should have offered closure, but it didn't. It opened wounds. The investigation, dormant for over a decade, had to be dragged out of hibernation. Case files were brittle with dust, pages yellowed, photos faded, but more than the evidence, it was the people who had changed. Memories were unreliable, faces blurred with time. What once felt urgent was now buried under years of forced forgetting. Yet the town had not truly moved on. At the center of it all was the Dickey family, or what was left of it. Josh Dickey, once seen mowing his lawn or walking his daughter to school, had become a recluse. After the disappearance, he stayed in town but never invited the public in. He didn't move away, didn't remarry, didn't speak. His silence became its own form of confession. Though no charges were ever filed, now, with Delilah back, eyes turned To ward him again, he kept the old house boarded up and forgotten, as if waiting for someone who'd never come home. The grass grew unchecked, weeds twisted up the mailbox, but inside, nothing had changed. Her room still had posters on the walls, a toy set half tucked under her bed. Dust covered but untouched. He had waited, and now she was back. Police questioned him again. Neighbors whispered. Had he known something all along? Had he hidden it? Had he been complicit, or simply broken by grief? Delilah didn't say much about her father. She hadn't seen him in years. Their reunion was quiet, barely noted by the press. No cameras, no dramatic embrace, just two people staring at each other, shaped by time and absence. But the questions didn't stop with Josh. Attention shifted to Meredith. Who had she been? A midwife, a mother, a woman known to many but truly understood by few. After her disappearance, friends described her as quiet, reserved, but kind. Some said she was stressed in the weeks leading up to that morning. Others remembered nothing unusual at all. The timeline, however, told a different story. In the days before she vanished, Meredith had called the police twice. The reasons for the calls weren't immediately clear. One report mentioned a suspicious vehicle, the other, an unidentified man near the house. Neither led to action. The police marked them as low priority. Nothing came of them. Until now. Detectives revisited the reports. They looked again at street cam footage, at traffic logs, at call records, and slowly, patterns began to emerge. A van had been spotted circling the neighborhood that week. Unmarked, older, rust along the bumper. It showed up twice, once the morning before Meredith vanished. No plates were recorded. It disappeared as easily as it had arrived. Meanwhile, Delilah's fragmented memories began to form a picture. A staircase, the sound of pipes above her, the smell of bleach, a man's voice, deep but rarely used, and another child's cry, faint, then gone. Investigators began cross-referencing unsolved cases, other disappearances, missing boys unconnected at the time, now possibly part of a larger pattern. But without more from Delilah, they could only guess. Then came a break. An anonymous letter, typed, no fingerprints, no return address. It arrived at the station late on a Friday afternoon. Inside were 7 words. You're looking in the wrong direction. No context, no names, just the chilling certainty of someone watching. It rattled the lead detective. Was it a taunt, a warning, or a clue? The letter sparked renewed surveillance. Police re-interviewed everyone close to Meredith, co-workers, friends, former patients. One name kept surfacing, Becca Franklin, a neighbor, close to Meredith, maybe. Too close. Becca had lived across the street. She'd been seen at the Dickey home often. She helped babysit Delilah once or twice. Friendly, polite, quiet. But she had moved out shortly after the disappearance. No forwarding address. Gone, just like Meredith. Now, with Delilah's return, detectives wanted to find her. Not as a suspect, not yet, but because she might have seen something, might have known something, or might have been running from something. Old neighbors described her house, small, neat, ordinary. But one detail stood out. In the weeks before Meredith vanished, Becca had started keeping her curtains closed, even during the day. When investigators entered the abandoned property, under a warrant, they found nothing overtly suspicious. The place was empty, but in the basement, they found scratch marks along the doorframe, deep, repetitive. As if someone had tried to claw their way out. That discovery shifted the case from a cold file to an active nightmare. What had really happened? 11 years ago. Where had Delilah been kept, and who else knew? Because now it was clear, someone had helped keep her hidden, and someone still wanted the truth buried. The town began to hold its breath again. Every locked door, every flickering light, every memory of a shadow outside a window came back into focus. There was a new urgency now, the kind that comes not from curiosity, but dread, the realization that for 11 years, something sinister had been hiding in plain sight. The scratch marks found in Becca Franklin's basement weren't easily dismissed. They were human, nails dug deep into painted wood. Not one or two, but many, old layers of clawed desperation, like someone had been locked down there, trapped, forgotten. or deliberately ignored. Investigators began to piece things together. The basement wasn't large, more of a storm cellar, but it had a locking mechanism on the outside of the door. It wasn't obvious at first, painted over, nearly rusted shut, but it was there, and it wasn't standard. Forensics swept the room. Blacklight revealed faded stains across the concrete floor, possibly blood, possibly something else. And tucked behind a loose panel, they found something chilling. A child's sock, that tiny, pink, worn thin. It didn't prove anything, not legally, but emotionally, it turned theory into reality. Delilah had been kept somewhere, and this might have been it. The search for Becca Franklin intensified. She hadn't just moved away, she'd disappeared. No property in her name, no employment record after she left town. It was as if she had dissolved into the air. But then, an old co-worker at the hospital remembered something odd. Becca had once told her that she envied Meredith, not in a joking way, in a strange, offhand comment made late during a shift. She has everything, she had said. A husband, a daughter, a place in the world. It hadn't meant anything at the time. Now, it meant everything. Meanwhile, Delilah was slowly beginning to speak more, not directly, not with ease, but through drawings, gestures, and half-formed sentences. In one session with a specialist, she pointed to a picture of a house and circled a basement window. Then she drew a figure, tall, with long hair, female. The possibility that a woman had been involved in the abduction threw investigators off course. They had been looking for a man, a predator, a monster who fit the profile. But this wasn't. That simple dot. And then there was Leo, Delilah's younger brother, born 2 years after her disappearance. He had never known his sister. To him, she was a photograph, a ghost in the family. But her return changed him. Quiet before, he now seemed unsettled, always listening, always watching. He began asking questions no one wanted to answer, and he began having dreams, strange, vivid dreams of a woman calling to him through a wall, a voice in the dark, a hand brushing against his. His parents dismissed it as stress, but there was something else in his dreams that disturbed them. He described a house, one he had never seen, but one that Delilah had been drawing in her sessions. It had a red door, a cracked mailbox, a wind chime made of broken keys. Investigators began combing through old property records, looking for any house matching those features. A few matched in part, only one matched completely. It had been rented briefly under a false name around the time Meredith and Delilah disappeared. A cabin off the main roads, deep into the woods, just outside the county line. Abandoned for years, when police entered, they expected decay. What they found was a tomb. The furniture was covered in sheets, but the air held something darker, the kind of stillness that speaks of terrible things, witnessed in silence. A mattress on the floor, no windows, chains beneath the frame, and in the corner, a child's drawing, taped to the wall, curling at the edges. It showed two stick figures, one small, one tall. The tall one was holding a key. Behind them, a door, closed. And beneath it, scribbled in shaky letters, she said not to open it. Who was she who held the key, and what was behind that door? Police believed they were closer than ever, but they were also beginning to understand that the story they thought they knew about a woman and her daughter vanishing was only half the truth. The other half had been buried in guilt, in obsession, in complicity, because someone in town had helped keep the lie alive. And they weren't finished yet. Memories are fragile. They bend, they blur, they distort themselves to survive. For Delilah, the years in captivity had fractured her past into floating pieces, jagged and half-lit. But as time passed, those pieces began to settle, and with them came something unexpected. A new face, not a captor, not someone she feared, someone she trusted. A woman. Kind eyes, a soft voice, the smell of soap and lavender. Delilah remembered her in moments, bringing food, whispering that things would be okay, telling her stories when the dark became too loud, but always followed by a warning: don't tell him I was here. It didn't make sense, not to the police, not to the therapists. If there had been to people involved in Delilah's captivity, why hadn't she spoken up sooner? But trauma plays tricks. Delilah hadn't known she was allowed to remember. Now she did. Investigators redoubled their efforts. They reanalyzed everything. Who could this second person have been? Why help a captive child, only to disappear? And most importantly, was this woman also keeping Meredith hidden? If Meredith was even still alive, then came another fracture. In the case, a woman named Ruth Baxter, once a nurse at the clinic where Meredith had worked, came forward. She hadn't spoken up before. Fear, maybe, or shame. But Delilah's drawings had struck something in her. She recognized the house with the red door. She had been there once. She hadn't known what it was then. Just an old cabin where her cousin, a handyman, had once done some work. A broken heater, a strange job, cash only, no receipt. But he had told her something out after. He said the woman who answered the door was polite, but nervous. He remembered the wind chimes made of old keys. Police traced the cousin. He confirmed the story. He remembered the cabin. He remembered a face. And for the first time, there was a real lead. A sketch was created. Delilah was shown the image. She flinched. And then, not a dot, it was her. The woman who whispered bedtime stories in the dark, who brought food in quiet steps, who cried when she thought Delilah was asleep, but who had never helped her escape. Who was she? It wasn't Becca Franklin. Her photo brought no reaction. But the woman in the sketch, she had been there, which meant the net of suspects was wider than they'd thought. Then came another twist. Leo, curious, still dreaming, still haunted, found something hidden in the attic. A box. Inside were photographs, old, candid, family moments. But buried beneath them was a photo he didn't recognize. It was of a woman, sitting beside Meredith on a park bench. They were smiling. Meredith had her arm draped over her shoulder. Written on the back, "Me and Kay, summer 12. The year they disappeared." Leo showed the photo to his father. Josh. Dickey froze. He took the photo, didn't speak, left the room. When Leo snuck back, later, the photo was gone. Whatever truth that image held, Josh wasn't ready to face it. But the photo didn't just disappear. Leo had scanned it before showing his dad. He brought it to Delilah, and when she saw the woman, she began to shake. Her lip trembled. Her hands curled into fists. She looked away, then nodded. "She helped me," she said, a breakthrough. For the first time, police had both a visual ID and a name, Kay. They started digging. Friends of Meredith were interviewed again. Old school rosters, hospital staff lists, social media connections. And then they found it. Catherine Hayes, a doula, not a registered nurse, but someone Meredith had worked with briefly during her time as a midwife. She had left the area shortly after Meredith disappeared. No explanation. No forwarding address. But a marriage license surfaced. Catherine Hayes had changed her name to Catherine Franklin, Becca's sister. The threads pulled tight. It wasn't Becca's house that had held Delilah captive. It had been used, briefly, maybe as a holding place. But Catherine had been the one keeping her. She had played both sides, friend to Meredith, ghost to the investigation, guardian to Delilah, and jailer. It was a betrayal so intimate, so deeply disguised, no one had seen it coming. And now, she was missing too. But for how long? And why, after all these years, had she let Delilah go? Was it remorse, or was it something much worse? Sometimes, it isn't the person who disappears that changes everything. It's the hole they leave behind. The void, the rearrangement of lives in their absence. And in the case of Meredith and Delilah, Dickey, that void had become a quiet force pushing, reshaping, haunting. When Catherine Hayes, now known as Catherine Franklin, became the focus of the investigation, the puzzle that had confounded detectives for more than a decade began shifting. She had always been close to Meredith, too close, in hindsight. Their professional connection as birth workers had overlapped more than expected. Catherine had no family in town. She often spent holidays with the Dickeys. Photos emerged: Catherine holding baby Delilah, arms wrapped tightly, possessively, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The pieces had been hiding in plain sight, but she had managed to vanish just as completely as the others. It became clear to investigators, this wasn't impulsive. This was orchestrated. Delilah's fragmented memories, previously dismissed as confused trauma responses, now took on chilling clarity. She had never been in one place for long. She was moved at night, often wrapped in blankets, placed in back seats of vehicles she couldn't describe, always with the same instruction: be still, be quiet, no one can know. Sometimes there were others, a man's voice, another child, though she could never remember the face. Once, she recalled hearing her own name on a radio. Catherine had yanked the dial so quickly it snapped off. But why? Why take a child she had once called her goddaughter? Why betray someone she had once treated like a sister? The working theory was unstable obsession. Detectives speculated Catherine's desire for a family one. She never had twisted into something unrecognizable. Friends described her as clingy with Meredith, often inserting herself into personal milestones, offering help that wasn't asked for. Meredith had confided to one co-worker that she'd been trying to set boundaries with Catherine. "She means well," she'd said, "but sometimes it feels like she wants my life." And then there was the most damning revelation. Shortly before she vanished, Meredith had discovered she was pregnant again. A boy. She hadn't told many people, just Josh, and, as the hospital logs later revealed, Catherine. After that conversation, Meredith's behavior changed. She seemed anxious, distracted. She missed a few appointments. A neighbor heard her arguing with someone through the back fence, though they never saw who. As investigators tried to recreate the days before Meredith vanished, another discovery surfaced: a storage unit rented under an alias. Inside, they found items from Delilah's childhood that hadn't been recovered: stuffed animals, drawings, even a journal of Meredith's that had never been seen before. The journal changed everything. It revealed that Meredith had begun to suspect someone was watching the house, following her. She didn't name Catherine, but one entry stood out: "I thought it was a friend. Now I'm not so sure." What followed in the journal hinted at a confrontation. Meredith had planned to meet someone in private to clear the air. That meeting was scheduled the same day she disappeared. Police now believed Meredith never left of her own free will. She was lured. As for Catherine, her last confirmed sighting was caught on a security camera outside a rest stop to States. Away years ago, she was with a young girl who matched Delilah's age at the time. They were buying snacks. The footage was brief, but what chilled investigators was how normal it all looked. Like a mother and daughter running errands. Like a life stolen and worn like a disguise. Public pressure mounted. The case was back in headlines. Delilah, now older, was shielded from the media. But the pressure wasn't only external. It began cracking the walls of the Dickey home from within. Josh, already fractured, began withdrawing further. His grief, once still, now surfaced in angry bursts. Leo, watching his family unravel, began sneaking into the garage at night, digging through his mother's old boxes, searching for answers no one wanted to explain. That's when he found the envelope, unmarked, sealed. Inside, a single Polaroid photo. It showed a woman standing in a forest clearing. Her back to the camera, she was holding a child's hand. The child had red shoes, ones Delilah had been wearing when she disappeared. But the woman, it wasn't Catherine. It was Meredith. Alive. Or at least she had been when the photo was taken. There was no timestamp, no location, no note. Just the image, grainy, sun-drenched, impossible to ignore. It changed everything again. Because now, the question wasn't just who had taken them, but who had kept them, and whether one of them had made the choice to stay. The photo changed everything, and nothing. It was proof, or close enough to it, that Meredith had been alive after her official disappearance. But it was also a ghost, a frozen glimpse into a moment that couldn't explain itself. Josh stared at the image for hours, saying nothing. Then one night, he burned it in the fireplace. But Leo had made copies. The fire didn't erase the truth. It only exposed his desperation to hide it. Detectives, already stretched thin, refocused the search. If Meredith had been alive, even for a short time, then everything about the case had to be reconsidered. Theories collapsed, new ones rose from the ashes. Why would a woman vanish with her daughter, only for the daughter to be returned a decade later? Why had Meredith never contacted anyone? Not her husband, not her son, Not even the police? And then there was the most damning possibility. What if she had tried? More pieces emerged. A handwritten letter was found in an old Poe box that had been inactive for years. Addressed to a childhood friend of Meredith's, never mailed. The paper was yellowed, but the ink was clear. It wasn't long or emotional. Just a single sentence. I did what I had to do. The friend didn't know what to make of it, but investigators believed it was real. The handwriting matched. The date placed it about a year after the disappearances. Then came the break no one expected. A car, long abandoned at a towing lot outside a rural town, was flagged in a national database after the new search gained attention. It had been impounded for illegal parking and left unclaimed. The title traced back to a shell identity, one Catherine had used before. In the trunk, among moldy clothes and old receipts, they found a hospital bracelet. The name was missing, the print faded, but it listed postnatal care. There had been a baby, Meredith's second child, the one almost no one had known about. Delilah had a brother, and he had been born somewhere in the silence. From here, the case twisted into something more human and more horrifying. Based on medical timelines, it appeared Meredith had gone into labor not long after disappearing. She had delivered the child without hospital assistance, likely at one of the safe houses Catherine had used. But something had gone wrong, or very right, because Meredith had vanished again shortly after. One retired social worker, now living in another state, came forward with a memory she couldn't shake. Years ago, a woman had visited the clinic she worked at. She had a child with her, no ID, no insurance. She claimed to be passing through. She'd used the name Marie Daniels. The child had red hair, bright eyes, and a nervous energy. The woman had asked strange questions, mostly about changing birth records and homeschooling laws. She left before the appointment, but the social worker remembered her face. When shown a picture of Meredith Dickey, she nearly dropped it. She was sure it had been her. So Meredith hadn't been dead. Not even close. She had been in hiding. But from what? From whom? And why bring Delilah back after so many years if she'd chosen to leave in the first place? And then, the final break came from within the walls of the Dickey house. Leo, driven by everything he couldn't understand, began recording conversations, secretly. Late-night phone calls, murmured arguments between his father and family members. One night, he caught something. Josh, speaking to someone, a sister, maybe. His voice was low, strained. If they find out I knew, he said, they'll take everything. That was all investigators needed. Josh was brought in for questioning. He denied everything, but the seeds of doubt had already been planted. And with new warrants in hand, the search turned to the digital trail, old hard drives, forgotten emails, hidden folders. What they found confirmed the unthinkable. Josh had known not everything, not the captivity, not the full extent, but enough to damn him, enough to explain his silence. Meredith had contacted him once early on. She had begged him not to call police. She claimed she had to run, that someone was going to take her children. She didn't name names, but the fear in her words had been palpable. He'd believed her, or at least, he had wanted to. So he kept quiet. He told no one, and when she disappeared again, he told himself it had been a dream, a mistake, a lie that had saved no one. The family that once held secrets now sat beneath their crushing weight. Delilah, now older than her mother had been when she vanished, had become a symbol, a survivor. But she knew only fragments, a mother who whispered, stories in the dark, a man who came and went like a storm, a house with no clocks, and the sound of her own voice echoing down walls no one ever heard her behind. And now, she wanted to know what happened to her mother, where she had gone, why she had stayed away, and whether she was still out there watching waiting or buried somewhere. No one had dared to look. The truth, when it finally emerged, did not come in a single revelation. It arrived in pieces, letters, witness accounts, forgotten photos, quiet confessions. But together, they formed the story Meredith Dickey had spent years trying to keep buried. She hadn't been kidnapped, not at first. The danger she feared had been real, but it hadn't come from strangers. It had come from within. After her second pregnancy, Meredith had uncovered something deeply unsettling at the clinic where she worked. Medical records altered, births unaccounted for, a network of illegal adoptions rooted through compromised staff, and at the center of it, Catherine Hayes, her trusted friend. Meredith had confronted her, quietly. Carefully, she'd planned to report her, but Catherine had been watching, listening, and she acted first. What followed wasn't just a disappearance, it was a dismantling. Meredith and Delilah were taken, hidden, and Meredith was forced to cooperate under threat, not just to her life, but to her children's. For a while, she played along. She pretended to trust Catherine, gained privileges, and then she ran into the wilderness with both children and vanished. The years that followed were harder to trace, but through fragments recovered from shelters, off-the-grid locations, and social records, the picture sharpened. Meredith had lived under aliases, always moving, homeschooling her children, keeping no digital footprint. Eventually, she left Delilah behind, not out of cruelty, but out of desperation. The girl had grown sick, and Meredith couldn't risk losing both of them, so she brought Delilah close to town one night and let her go. Then she disappeared again, this time for good. A body was never found, but one final piece told the ending, or at least part of it. A DNA match was confirmed in a small coastal town, 3 states away. A teenage boy. No birth certificate, no school records. Raised by a Marie Daniels, now deceased. He matched the timeline. He matched the bloodline. He was Meredith's son. When asked about his past, he said only this: "She always told me we were hiding from someone who used to be her sister." The past could no longer stay hidden. Josh Dickey was charged with obstruction. Catherine Franklin was declared a fugitive. Delilah and her brother, now reunited, were placed in protected custody. And Meredith, her body was never found. But her choices, her sacrifices, her silence, they told their own story. In the end, the local women missing had never truly left. They were always there. In the quiet grief of a town that had looked the other way. In the pages of a journal no one thought to read. In the shadows of a home where secrets once slept. And now, in the eyes of 2 children who had grown up in the dark and learned how to survive it.